The air was thick with the sounds of traffic and the murmurs of a bustling city. But in a corner of the busy New York City street, something caught Donald Trump's attention. It wasn't the billboards advertising the latest luxury products or the hustle of Wall Street. It was a man, ragged and worn, sitting by the curb, his tattered jacket a far cry from the polished suits Trump was known for. Trump's eyes narrowed as he slowed down his steps. The man's face, weathered by time and hardship, looked familiar, but it wasn't until he saw the faded military insignia on the man's jacket that it clicked. "Is that him?" Trump muttered under his breath. The homeless man, a veteran, was no ordinary person. His name was Frank Adams, a name Trump recognized from his own past, though he had never expected to cross paths with him in this way. Back in the 1980s, when Trump was first making his mark in real estate, Frank Adams had been a decorated war hero, an officer who had served with distinction in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. Their paths had crossed once in a social circle, and Trump had heard of Adams' tragic fall after a series of personal losses, including the death of his wife and the loss of his home in a fire. Adams had vanished from the public eye after that, and Trump had assumed the man's life had spiraled into obscurity. Yet here he was, on the cold, unforgiving streets of the city, a shadow of the man Trump once knew. Without thinking, Trump walked up to Frank, his shoes clicking on the pavement, and crouched down beside him. "Frank," Trump said, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Is that really you?" Frank looked up, his eyes glazed over with a mixture of disbelief and indifference. He took a moment to process, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's me," he said, his voice hoarse, as if the years of hardship had taken their toll. "I guess I'm just another forgotten soul now." Trump sat down beside him on the curb, the weight of the moment settling in. For a moment, the bustling city around them seemed to fade into the background, and all that existed was this unexpected reunion. "How did this happen, Frank?" Trump asked, his voice softening. "You were a hero. You were someone who had everything going for you. What went wrong?" Frank hesitated, then let out a bitter laugh. "Life. Life went wrong. War changes a man, Trump. But losing everything, losing the woman I loved, that's what truly did me in." Trump could feel the weight of those words, the pain in Frank's voice, and for the first time in a long while, he felt his usual bravado waver. This wasn't just a veteran. This was someone who had once stood beside the best and brightest in the country, and now he was left to beg for scraps on the streets. But Trump was a man of action, not one to stand idly by. As he stared at Frank, a thought formed in his mind, a plan that would not only surprise Frank, but the entire city. Trump wasn't known for his compassion, but in this moment, he knew he had to do something big. "Frank," Trump said, his voice gaining strength, "I'm not going to let this happen. You're not going to spend the rest of your life here. I'll make sure of it." Frank stared at him, disbelief etched across his face. "What do you mean?" Trump's eyes gleamed with determination. "I'm going to give you the chance to rebuild. I'll make sure you get the help you need. We'll get you a job. I'll get you back into the game, Frank. You deserve more than this." Trump stood up, his mind racing. This wasn't just a matter of offering a handout. It was about offering Frank a real shot at redemption. He had seen how people could bounce back with the right kind of support. This wouldn't be a temporary fix. Frank needed something that would change the course of his life forever. "I'll make a few calls," Trump said, his voice firm. "You won't be on these streets for long, Frank. I promise you that." Frank looked up at him with a skeptical expression. "You think that's going to work? You think a few phone calls will fix all of this?" Trump met his gaze. "I don't just make calls. I make things happen. I've built my empire on making the impossible possible. You'll see. But first, you need to trust me." Frank was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. The years of living on the streets had hardened him, and he had learned not to trust easily. But something in Trump's eyes, something genuine, something that didn't come from the polished businessman he usually saw on TV, made him pause. "All right," Frank finally said, "I'll trust you." Trump offered him a hand, helping him up from the cold pavement. It wasn't just an offer of assistance, it was a lifeline. "Good," Trump said. "Now let's get you off this street and into a real conversation." As they walked down the street, Trump pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew would get results. The person on the other end picked up almost immediately. "Donald, what's going on?" The voice on the other end sounded casual, but Trump could tell the man was already wondering what kind of business deal was about to unfold. "I need a favor," Trump said, his tone commanding but not impatient. "I've got a man here who needs a fresh start. I need you to get him into the system. Housing, job placement, therapy, everything. We're going to give him a real shot." There was a pause. "Are you serious? This is a big move, Trump. You sure about this?" "I'm sure," Trump replied without hesitation. "He served our country, and he deserves more than to die in the streets. I want everything ready for him, and I need it fast." Another pause, then the voice on the other end agreed. "All right, consider it done. I'll have everything lined up for him by tomorrow." Trump hung up the phone and looked over at Frank. "That was just the first step. You're going to get the help you need fast. You won't be out here for long." Frank couldn't believe it. He had spent years in the shadows, a man ignored by society, living off scraps and the kindness of strangers. And now, in one day, this one person, someone he thought was just a famous businessman, was offering him a chance to change it all. It was surreal. The next few days felt like a blur to Frank. Trump had arranged for him to stay at a nearby luxury hotel until everything was sorted out. The accommodations were worlds away from the dingy alleyways and cardboard boxes he had grown accustomed to. He could hardly believe did I in the mornings. Trump arranged meetings with people who could help him rebuild. Social workers, therapists, financial advisors. One by one, they came offering their expertise, but none of it felt real to Frank. He had spent so many years surviving on his own, he wasn't sure he even wanted this new life. But as each day passed, Frank began to realize that maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to make something of himself again. He was still haunted by his past, by the things he had done and the people he had lost, but with Trump's help, he was starting to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Trump, on the other hand, was determined to make Frank's transition a success. He visited him daily, checking in on his progress, and soon began putting the veteran in touch with people who could offer him opportunities. A local construction company, a few real estate ventures that could use a steady worker. There were doors opening everywhere. But the real surprise came when Trump offered Frank an opportunity he hadn't expected, an entry-level position in one of his own companies. "Don't get me wrong," Trump said as they sat in his office one afternoon. "This isn't charity. You're going to work for it, but I'm willing to give you a shot. You've got the drive, and you've got the experience. We'll start slow, but I see potential in you, Frank." Frank's jaw dropped. A job at one of Trump's companies? He hadn't been employed in years. But as the days passed and he started to see the changes in his life, he realized that he couldn't afford to pass up this chance. It was a week after Trump had offered him the job that Frank's first day at work finally arrived. Frank stood in front of the mirror in the hotel room, staring at the suit and tie Trump had arranged for him to wear. He hardly recognized himself. Gone were the layers of dirt and exhaustion from the streets. Now, he saw a man who had been given a chance to start over. He could still feel the skepticism inside him. Could he really change? Could he overcome the mistakes of his past and prove that he was worth the second chance he'd been given? Trump had said this wasn't charity, and he meant it. Frank had spent his first few days at the company learning the ropes, shadowing employees, and understanding the systems that powered the business. It wasn't easy. He was constantly reminded of how far he had fallen. There were times when his old habits, the scars of war, would make things harder than they needed to be. But Trump was persistent. He visited Frank during lunch breaks, offering words of encouragement. "You can do this, Frank. It's not about where you've been. It's about where you're going. You got to keep moving forward." It wasn't just the job that was changing Frank. The therapy sessions were helping him work through the trauma he had carried with him for so many years. The therapy wasn't a quick fix. It was painful, digging up the darkest parts of his past. But it was part of the process, and slowly, day by day, he felt something inside him healing. There were moments of doubt. On a particularly hard morning, Frank almost gave up. His mind flashed back to his time on the streets. The years spent struggling, the nights spent cold and alone. Could he really keep this up? Was he worthy of this new life? But then he thought of Trump. The man had seen something in him, had given him the opportunity to prove himself. He couldn't let that opportunity slip away.
If you're enjoying this story and want more captivating tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to Storytelling Sphere. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Your support keeps these powerful stories coming. Now let's dive back into the story.
Weeks went by, and Frank continued to prove himself at work. He showed up early, worked hard, and started building relationships with his colleagues. While his past still lingered in his mind, the present was full of new possibilities. He wasn't the man he had been, but he was becoming someone he could respect again. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a busy afternoon at the office, and Trump had called Frank into his office for a meeting. Frank had no idea what to expect, but he had learned not to question the man who had given him this second chance. Trump greeted him with a smile and gestured for him to sit down. "Frank," he began, "you've done something I didn't expect. You've worked harder than I thought you would, and you've stayed committed. You've proven yourself, and now it's time for the next step." Frank's heart pounded in his chest. What was Trump going to say? "I'm promoting you," Trump continued. "You're going to manage a small team. This is your chance to lead, Frank, to show the world that the man you were is long gone. You've earned this." Frank was speechless. A promotion? He had never imagined this day would come, not after everything he had been through. The weight of it hit him all at once, and for the first time in years, tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. Thank you," Frank stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think I deserved any of this. But now, you're telling me I'm ready." Trump nodded, his expression serious. "You're ready. You've earned it, and you've got everything it takes to succeed. But remember, it's not just about you anymore. It's about the people who are looking up to you now. You've got the chance to change more lives than just your own." Frank stood up, his legs shaky, and shook Trump's hand. "I won't let you down." As Frank took on the role of managing his team, the transformation in his life became even more apparent. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a leader. The employees who worked with him saw the dedication, the resilience, and the grit that he had fought so hard to regain. They respected him, and many of them didn't even know about his past. They only saw the man who had clawed his way back from rock bottom and was now thriving. But what really surprised Frank was the ripple effect his story had on others. As he opened up more about his journey, others in the company started to share their own stories of struggle, of battles fought in silence. Frank had become a symbol of resilience, and it wasn't long before Trump started to get involved in a bigger way. Trump had always been known for his bold moves, but seeing how Frank's journey had touched so many people made him want to make a difference on a larger scale. He decided to create a new initiative, one that would help homeless veterans rebuild their lives, just as Frank had. The Veterans Rising initiative would partner with local businesses to provide jobs, therapy, and housing for veterans who had fallen through the cracks. And Frank, now a successful manager, was asked to be the face of the project. The day of the official launch of the Veterans Rising initiative was a monumental one. It was held in a lavish hall, filled with prominent figures from the business world, veterans, and supporters of the cause. Frank stood beside Trump, feeling the weight of everything that had led him to this moment. The man who had once been a forgotten soul on the streets was now standing at the helm of a movement that would help thousands of others like him. His journey from homeless veteran to influential leader had come full circle. Trump stood up to address the crowd, his voice booming as he spoke about the importance of giving back to those who serve the country. But then he turned to Frank, a smile on his face. "Frank Adams," Trump said, "you are the reason we are here today. You've shown that with determination and the right support, anyone can rebuild their life. This is your legacy now, and it's only just beginning." Frank looked out over the crowd, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had come from nothing, but now he was everything he had ever hoped to be. As Frank stood in front of the crowd, his emotions were a whirlwind. He had never imagined he would be here, speaking at such a prestigious event, representing not just himself but a cause that was bigger than him. The applause was deafening, and Frank felt a rush of gratitude. This was the moment he had worked so hard for, the culmination of everything he had endured and overcome. But even more than that, it was the beginning of something new. The Veterans Rising initiative had the power to change countless lives, to lift other men and women like Frank out of the shadows and give them a future they had never thought possible. After the speech, Trump walked up to Frank, giving him a pat on the back. "You did great out there," Trump said with a rare smile. "You've earned this." Frank nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "I didn't think I could do it, Trump, but now I believe anything is possible." Trump's expression softened for a moment. "That's the difference, Frank. You don't just have the skills. You've got the heart. You've already proven that." As the event wrapped up, Frank found himself surrounded by people, veterans, business leaders, and even media personnel who were interested in his story. He gave interviews and shared his journey with anyone who would listen. His tale of redemption had become a beacon of hope for so many who had lost faith in themselves. The next few weeks brought more attention to the Veterans Rising initiative. Frank's leadership skills were put to the test as the project gained momentum. He oversaw the placement of dozens of veterans into jobs, ensuring that they received the support they needed to make a smooth transition back into civilian life. With Trump's backing, the initiative spread across the country, inspiring even more businesses to partner with the cause. That Frank's story was no longer just about survival. It was about the power of second chances, of finding a way to move forward even when it seemed impossible. Months passed, and Frank's life continued to flourish in ways he could never have predicted. He had become not only a mentor to others, but also a symbol of hope for those who had lost their way. He often found himself thinking back to the dark days on the streets, to the nights when he had no idea how he would make it through the next day. He had come so far. But there was one part of his life that still felt incomplete: his personal life. He had spent so many years in survival mode, pushing everyone away, that he hadn't allowed himself the chance to truly connect with anyone. He had no family, no one who could call him their own. But that was about to change. Point one day, Trump called Frank into his office again. He had that look on his face, the one that meant something big was coming. "I've got something for you, Frank," Trump said, his voice unexpectedly soft. "I know you've been thinking about your past and the family you lost. I made some calls, and I think I found someone who might mean something to you." Frank's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I've located your sister," Trump said, his words slow and deliberate. "You have a sister, Frank, and she's been searching for you for years." Frank's eyes widened, the room feeling smaller as the weight of the revelation sank in. A sister? He had never known. He had lost track of his family long ago, pushed away by his pain and addiction. But now, there was a chance to reconnect. Trump handed him a folder, and Frank's hands shook as he opened it. There, in black and white, were the details: his sister's name, a recent photo of her, and a letter expressing how desperately she had wanted to find him. "I know this is a lot to process," Trump said, his voice gruff. "But this is a second chance at family, Frank. Don't let it slip away." Frank didn't speak at first, his mind racing. He had never imagined that he would get the chance to meet someone from his past, someone who could fill the void that had haunted him for so long. "I need some time," Frank finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is a lot." Trump gave him a nod of understanding. "Take all the time you need, but I think you'll find it's worth it." A week later, Frank found himself standing outside a modest house, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been good at meeting new people, let alone someone who could be family. But today was different. Today, he was about to meet his sister, the woman who had been searching for him, the woman whose name he hadn't even known until recently. As he knocked on the door, he felt a lump form in his throat. Was he ready for this? Was he ready to face the family he had lost? The door opened, and there she was. She looked so much like him. Her features, the shape of her eyes, the way her hair fell to her shoulders. It was like staring at a mirror from a past he couldn't quite remember. "Frank," her voice cracked, as though she couldn't believe it was real. "Samantha?" Frank asked, his own voice hoarse with emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "I never thought I would find you." Frank stood there for a long moment, the world around him fading as he held his sister, feeling a deep sense of connection he had never known. It was a new beginning, one he had never thought possible. In the days that followed, Frank and Samantha began to rebuild the family they had lost. Samantha had her own story, her own struggles, But she was there now, standing by him, just as he had always wished for. Together, they were stronger than ever before. As the months turned into a year, Frank's life continued to thrive. He had become a key figure in the Veterans Rising initiative, his story spreading across the country as a testament to the power of change. But it wasn't just about the work anymore. It was about the family he had rebuilt, the people who had become a part of his life, people who had supported him, just as Trump had. And Trump, he remained a constant presence in Frank's life, a mentor, a friend, and someone who had given him a chance when no one else would. Frank would never forget the day he had been pulled from the streets, and he would never stop fighting to give others the same opportunity. As the sun set over the city, Frank stood outside his office, watching the people below. They were walking by, each person on their own journey, and he realized something. No matter where they came from, no matter what they had endured, they all had the potential for redemption. And he was living proof of that. As the months passed, Frank's life continued to evolve in ways he had never imagined. He had built a successful foundation, the Veterans Rising initiative, which was now helping thousands of veterans across the country. He had earned respect from his peers and admiration from people who had once been too skeptical to believe in him. But for Frank, the real transformation had occurred within himself. The years of hardship, loneliness, and the moments of self-doubt were now nothing more than stepping stones on a path he had chosen, one of purpose and healing. And perhaps the greatest part of it all was knowing that his story had inspired others to take that first step, just as Trump had inspired him. One day, Frank received a call from a local school district. They wanted him to speak at a career day event, something he never would have imagined just a few short years ago. He agreed, knowing that it wasn't just for the students, but for the veterans who might be in the audience, struggling just as he once had. As he walked onto the stage, the young faces staring up at him were full of anticipation. It was a stark contrast to the intimidating rooms full of businessmen and politicians he was used to. But this was his true audience, the ones who needed to hear his story the most. He began his speech with a simple statement. "I'm not here to tell you that everything will be easy. Life is tough, but if I can go from the streets to where I am now, then I believe you can do anything too." The audience hung on every word, and by the end of his speech, many were visibly moved. Afterward, a few students came up to him, telling him how his story had changed their perspective on life. One young man, about 18 years old, asked Frank for advice. "I want to help others too," he said, "but I don't know where to start." Frank smiled and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Start with yourself, find your strength, and then use it to lift others. That's the secret." That night, as Frank looked out at the city from his apartment, he realized just how far he had come. What had begun as a single moment of change, a surprising meeting with Trump, had rippled outward in ways he couldn't have predicted. It wasn't just about getting off the streets or creating a foundation. It was about starting a movement. It was about showing people that no matter how deep the struggle, redemption was possible. With Veterans Rising now a national success, Frank found himself contemplating his next move. His work was far from over, but there was something else, a final, symbolic gesture that had been on his mind for months. He decided it was time to give back in a way that would solidify the impact he had made. He approached Trump once again, knowing that this would be a big ask. "I want to donate a portion of the initiative's funds to build a permanent shelter for homeless veterans," Frank said, his voice steady. "But not just any shelter. A place where they can not only live but also get the mental health care, job training, and resources they need to get back on their feet." Trump looked at him thoughtfully for a moment before nodding. "You've done well, Frank. I'm with you on this. Let's make it happen." And so, the Veterans Rising Shelter was born, a place where veterans could find more than just a roof over their heads. It would be a sanctuary for healing, for growth, and for rebuilding. The opening ceremony was a momentous occasion. Frank stood before a crowd of veterans, families, and supporters, his heart swelling with pride. He had made it. He had changed lives, and in the process, he had changed his own. Trump, who had been at his side through this entire journey, walked up to him, his voice sincere. "You've exceeded all my expectations, Frank. You didn't just rise, you've lifted others with you. And that's something I respect more than anything." Frank smiled, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, Trump. This journey, everything I've done, started with your belief in me. And for that, I'll be forever grateful." Years later, Frank stood at the head of the Veterans Rising Initiative, his hair a little grayer, but his resolve stronger than ever. The shelter had become a blueprint for similar projects across the nation. Frank had become a voice for the voiceless, a champion for those who had fought for this country but had been forgotten by it. And as he looked back at everything he had accomplished, one thing was clear. None of it would have been possible if he had not believed in himself, or if Trump had not seen the potential in a homeless veteran. The ripple effect had continued, far beyond what anyone could have imagined, creating a wave of change that would echo for generations to come.